A highly intriguing one-sentence premise that describes a shocking event or poses a dramatic question on the eve of a disastrous Thanksgiving that would see him disowned. A cold-hearted millionaire CEO discovered the children he never knew he had, forcing him to choose between the family he was born into and the one he had unknowingly created. Drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. Damien Sterling commanded his world from a throne of glass and steel, 40 stories above the sprawling city. It was the Wednesday before Thanksgiving, a day he resented for its forced sentimentality and its inconvenient disruption of commerce. Below him, the metropolis pulsed with life, but in his corner office, the only heartbeat that mattered was the steady, rhythmic ticker of the stock market displayed on a screen that spanned an entire wall. He was the CEO of Sterling Industries, a titan of global logistics, and his kingdom was one of concrete assets, ruthless negotiations, and quantifiable results. Emotions were liabilities, attachments were risks, and love was a currency he had long ago deemed worthless. His focus was lasered in on the final details of the Axiom merger, a corporate conquest that would cement his legacy as a man more formidable than even his own father. His phone buzzed on the polished obsidian desk. The caller ID read Chloe, his fiancée. He let it go to voicemail. Chloe was a part of the grand design, a beautiful and socially impeccable puzzle piece chosen by his family to merge the Sterling dynasty with another of equal prominence. Their relationship was a contract, their affection a performance for the society pages. He felt nothing for her, just a mild appreciation for her ability to play her part so well. "The final papers are ready for your signature, Mr. Sterling," his assistant said through the intercom, her voice as sterile as the office itself. He grunted in acknowledgement, his eyes still fixed on the numbers. He was a king in a gilded cage of his own making, powerful, respected, feared, and utterly, profoundly alone. He wouldn't have had it any other way. Or so he told himself. The drive home was meant to be a swift, silent glide through the city's arteries in the back of his Maybach. But tonight, the city had other plans. A pre-holiday parade, a gaudy spectacle of inflatable turkeys and marching bands, had gridlocked downtown. His driver, a man named Thomas who had perfected the art of being invisible, delivered the news with practiced deference. "I'm sorry, sir. The route is completely blocked. We can try to circle back, but it could take over an hour." Impatience, hot and sharp, flared in Damien's chest. He was not a man who waited. "Stop here. I'll walk." Thomas looked alarmed. "Sir, it's several blocks." And the crowds, but Damien was already pushing the door open, stepping out into the crisp November air. He adjusted the collar of his $1,000 coat, a dark silhouette moving against the tide of festive chaos. He decided to cut through a small, unassuming public park, a patch of green he'd only ever seen from his office window. The park was not empty. It was teeming with a different kind of crowd. A local charity was hosting an early Thanksgiving meal, ladling out soup and slicing pies for the city's forgotten souls. The air, thick with the smell of roasted turkey and cinnamon, felt foreign to him. He moved through the throng of people, his expensive leather shoes a stark contrast to the worn-out sneakers and cracked boots around him. He felt a flicker of annoyance, then a deeper, more unsettling feeling of being an intruder in a world he had spent his entire life actively ignoring. And then he saw them. Huddled together on a cold stone bench, sharing a single slice of pumpkin pie with a shared plastic fork, were two small children, a boy and a girl. They couldn't have been more than 7 years old. The boy was meticulously trying to fix a tiny, broken toy car, his brow furrowed in concentration. But it was the girl who stole Damien's breath. Around her neck, resting against her thin coat, was a simple silver locket. Time stopped. The noise of the park, the chatter, the distant music, it all faded into a dull roar. He knew that locket. He had held it in his own hands, felt its cool weight, and saved for 3 months working a menial college job to buy it. It was the first real gift he had ever given to anyone. To a woman named Elena Vance, the only woman he had ever truly loved. The woman his family had forced him to cast aside 8 years ago. As if pulled by an invisible string, he took a step closer. The children looked up, their meal interrupted. It was then that the second, more devastating blow landed. Their eyes. They were his eyes. Not just the color. A distinct, stormy shade of gray that photographers always tried to soften in his corporate headshots. But the shape, the intensity. It was like looking at a reflection of a part of himself he thought had died long ago. He felt a tremor run through him, a seismic shift in the very foundation of his reality. He approached the bench, his movements stiff and unnatural. The little boy, ever the protector, straightened his small shoulders. "Can we help you, mister?" he asked, his voice clear and steady. Damien couldn't find his own voice. He pointed a trembling finger at the locket. Where did you get that?" The girl, Lily, instinctively clutched the silver heart. "My mommy gave it to me," she said, her voice a soft whisper. "She said it was from our daddy. The one who had to go away." The world tilted on its axis. "Our daddy." The words echoed in the cavernous, empty space where his heart should have been. The boy, Leo, was still studying him, his gaze sharp and unnervingly perceptive. He tilted his head, a gesture so painfully familiar it made Damien's chest ache. "You look like the man in Mommy's old photo," Leo stated, not as a question, but as a fact. "The one she cries over sometimes." Damien froze. He was no longer a CEO, a tycoon, a master of the universe. He was a man standing in a park, staring at the ghost of his past and the undeniable, living proof of his greatest mistake. His phone buzzed again, a furious, insistent vibration in his pocket. It was Chloe, then his sister Victoria, the architects of his hollow life, calling him back to a world that suddenly felt like a fiction. He ignored them. The Axiom merger, the board meetings, the fortune, it all dissolved into meaningless static. He stumbled backward, away from the two small faces that held his entire history and his shattered future in their identical gray eyes. He couldn't breathe. His carefully constructed world had not just been shaken, it had been obliterated. Back in the sterile silence of his penthouse, the city lights twinkling below like a galaxy he no longer belonged to, Damien moved as if in a trance. He bypassed the liquor cabinet, the usual balm for his manufactured stresses. He went instead to a closet in his private study, a space no one else ever entered. On the top shelf, behind stacks of old financial reports, was a plain wooden box. His hands, usually so steady when signing multi-million-dollar contracts, trembled as he lifted it down. He blew a thin layer of dust from its lid and opened it. The faint scent of aged paper and dried flowers rose to meet him. Inside lay the ghosts of a life he had been forced to bury. Photographs of him and Elena, their faces bright with a youthful, unburdened love that now seemed like a cruel joke. They were in a university library, their heads bent together over a textbook. They were at a cheap diner, sharing a milkshake, Elena laughing so hard her eyes squeezed shut. She was beautiful, vibrant, and so achingly real it hurt to look at. He remembered their final conversation with searing clarity. It hadn't been a conversation, it had been an execution. He had been summoned to his father's imposing study, the same room where all Sterling family edicts were handed down. His father, Arthur Sterling, and his older sister, Victoria, had sat there like judges, their faces cold and implacable. The ultimatum was simple and brutal. End the relationship with Elena Vance, the scholarship girl with no pedigree, or be disowned, cut off from the family, the fortune, and his designated future as CEO of Sterling Industries. "She is a liability," Damien, Victoria had said, her voice dripping with condescending pity. "A pretty distraction that will drag you and this family's name through the mud. You were destined for more than this collegiate romance." His father had simply nodded, his silence a more damning condemnation than any words. Damien, young and ambitious, terrified of losing the only path he had ever known, had made his choice. He chose the company. He chose the legacy. He broke it off with Elena, feeding her a string of cold, calculated lies that shattered her heart and his own. He told himself it was a necessary sacrifice. He had never imagined the true cost. He picked up one of the photographs, his thumb tracing the outline of Elena's face. He remembered the day he gave her the locket. He had worked for months as a stockboy at a campus bookstore to afford it. When he fastened it around her neck, she had looked at him with a love so pure and absolute it had scared him. "I'll never take it off," she had promised. And she hadn't. She had given it to their daughter. Their daughter. The words were still foreign, impossible. A wave of guilt, so potent it was nauseating, washed over him. It was a physical force, pressing down on his chest, stealing the air from his lungs. All these years, he had allowed himself to believe that Elena had simply moved on, disappeared into a new life. He had built a fortress of wealth and power around the memory of his betrayal, hoping to suffocate the shame. Now, the walls of that fortress were crumbling to dust. His phone buzzed again, this time with a sharp, impatient tone he knew belonged to his sister. He answered, his voice a hoarse rasp. "What, Victoria?" Her voice was like ice shards down the line. "Damien, where have you been?" "Chloe is frantic. The Vanderbilts are expecting us for the pre-Thanksgiving toast at the club. You cannot be late. Think of the optics." Optics. Appearances. Legacy. The same words she had used 8 years ago. They were the pillars of their empty world, a world built on strategic alliances and social maneuvering. Every word she spoke now sounded hollow, grotesque. He saw the stark, horrifying contrast between her frantic concern over a society cocktail party and the image of his children sharing a single slice of pie in the cold. "Something's come up," he said, his voice flat and distant. "I'm not coming." "Not coming," she sputtered, her tone shifting from irritation to command. "Don't be ridiculous, Damien. This is important." He hung up, cutting off her tirade. He stared at the phone in his hand, a tool he usually used to command his empire. Now he would use it to find the truth. He scrolled through his contacts, past the titans of industry and society mavens, until he found the one name he knew he could trust with the impossible. Marcus. He dialed the number. Marcus, his head of security, answered on the first ring, his voice calm and professional as always. He was a former Special Forces operative, a man who dealt in facts and absolutes, unburdened by emotion. He was the perfect instrument for what Damien needed. "Marcus," Damien began, his voice low and urgent. "I need you to find someone. Her name is Elena Vance. I need to know everything. Where she lives, her current circumstances, and everything you can find out about her children. I need it by morning." He paused, the next words catching in his throat. "Discretion is absolute. No one can know you are doing this. Not my father. And especially not my sister." "Understood, sir," Marcus replied without a hint of surprise or curiosity. The line went dead. Damien was left alone in the silence of his penthouse. The ghosts in the wooden box staring up at him. Their happy faces a silent accusation. He waited. The hours crawled by, each tick of the designer clock on his wall a hammer blow against his conscience. Sleep was an impossibility. He just sat there, in the dark, as the city slept, waiting for the truth to arrive. Just before dawn, his phone rang. It was Marcus. Damien's heart hammered against his ribs. "What did you find?" he asked, his voice strained. Marcus's voice on the other end was different this time. It was still professional, but it was tinged with something grim, something heavy. "Sir, I found her. She lives in a rundown apartment building in the West End. A 2-room flat. She works as a waitress at the 24-hour diner nearby." Damien closed his eyes, a fresh wave of shame washing over him. A waitress. While he was closing billion-dollar deals, she was serving coffee to get by. And the children? Damien pressed, dreading the answer. "There's more, sir," Marcus continued, his voice low. "I accessed hospital records. Elena Vance gave birth to twins 7 years ago. A boy, Leo, and a girl, Lily. The birth certificates list the father as unknown." Each word was a nail in the coffin of his ignorance. But Marcus wasn't finished. The next piece of information would be the one that turned his guilt into a burning, focused rage. "And sir, I traced her movements after she left the university town 8 years ago. The address she was forced to move to. It was a dilapidated rental property owned by a shell corporation." Marcus paused, letting the weight of his next words land. "A shell corporation that, after some digging, traces directly back to a discretionary fund within Sterling Industries. A fund controlled exclusively by one person. Your sister, Victoria Sterling." The air left Damien's lungs in a rush. It wasn't enough for Victoria to force them apart. She had orchestrated Elena's entire life of hardship. She had pushed her into poverty, controlled her from the shadows, and ensured she would remain buried, helpless, and silent. This wasn't just a family ultimatum. This was a conspiracy. A cold, cruel, and systematic destruction of a woman's life. And his children, his innocent children, had paid the price for a crime they didn't even know had been committed. The cold detachment he had cultivated for years finally shattered, and in its place, a white-hot fury began to burn. The revelation of Victoria's calculated cruelty changed everything. Damien knew he couldn't simply appear in Elena's life, a billionaire phantom from her past, and expect to mend the chasm of 8 years. It would be an intrusion, another display of power from a world that had already cost her so much. He had to understand. He had to see. So he devised a plan, one that required him to shed the skin of Damien Sterling and become someone else entirely. Through Marcus's discreet inquiries, he learned more about their life. Elena worked double shifts at the diner to afford the rent and the fees for the after-school program at the local community center, the very center where he had first seen his children. The center, run by a woman named Sarah, was perpetually on the verge of collapse, plagued by leaky pipes, faulty wiring, and a constant lack of funding. It was his way in. The next morning, dressed in worn jeans, a faded sweatshirt, and a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes, Damien walked into the Northwood Community Center. He was no longer the CEO of Sterling Industries. He was Dan, a man looking for volunteer work. Sarah, the director, was a woman in her late 50s with tired eyes and a warm, resilient smile. She looked him over, her gaze assessing but not unkind. "We can always use an extra pair of hands," she said, gesturing to the peeling paint on the walls. "Can you handle a toolbox?" He nodded. "I'm decent with repairs." It was an understatement. He'd spent his teenage summers working on engines and construction sites, a rebellion his father had briefly tolerated before forcing him into the corporate track. He spent the entire day working. He fixed the sputtering fluorescent lights in the main hall, patched a leaking pipe under the kitchen sink that had been dripping for months, and reinforced the legs on the wobbly tables where the children did their homework. With every turn of the wrench, every nail he hammered, he felt a piece of the cold, sterile artifice of his old life chip away. This was real work. It had immediate, tangible results. It mattered. Late in the afternoon, he was up on a ladder adjusting a ceiling fan when Elena arrived to pick up the twins. He watched from his perch as she walked in, her face etched with a weariness that seemed to have settled deep into her bones. Her waitress uniform was clean but faded, her shoulders slumped from exhaustion. She greeted Sarah with a tired smile before her eyes found Leo and Lily. For a moment, the exhaustion vanished, replaced by a look of fierce, all-encompassing love. He saw Lily run to her, proudly showing off a drawing she had made. He saw Leo show her the toy car, now with a new wheel he had fashioned from a bottle cap. Then, he witnessed the moment that drove the knife of his guilt deeper into his heart. Elena pulled a small carton of milk and 2 straws from her bag. She placed it on the table between them. "Share nicely," she said softly. Leo and Lily nodded, taking careful, measured sips, ensuring the other got their fair half. The sight was so simple, so devastating. In his world, people fought over percentage points and stock options. In their world, they shared a single carton of milk. He looked down at his own hands, clean and manicured beneath the grime of the day's work. He thought of the vintage scotch he had poured down the drain last night, a bottle that cost more than their monthly rent. He saw the soles of Leo's shoes, worn so thin they were nearly transparent, and the carefully sewn patch on the elbow of Lily's coat. This was the life Victoria had condemned them to. This was the hardship he had allowed to happen through his own weakness and willful ignorance. He climbed down from the ladder, his heart a heavy, painful stone in his chest. He made sure to keep his head down, his face obscured by the cap. He didn't want to be recognized. Not yet. He needed more time in this world, more time to understand the depth of the damage before he could even begin to think about how to fix it. Over the next few days, Dan became a quiet fixture at the center. He spoke little, but his work spoke for him. He repaired the broken swing set in the small playground, replastered a crumbling wall, and even managed to get the ancient furnace to stop its violent rattling. The children, initially wary of the silent man who was always fixing things, began to warm to him. The breakthrough came with Leo. The boy was fascinated by tools and mechanics, his mind sharp and inquisitive. He would watch Dan work, asking intelligent questions about gears and wiring. One afternoon, Damien was working on the engine of the center's aging van, a vehicle that was more rust than metal. Leo stood beside him, handing him wrenches and sockets like a seasoned assistant. "You're trying to recalibrate the fuel injector," Leo stated, pointing a small, slightly greasy finger. "But the gasket is worn. It'll never hold the pressure." Damien looked at his 7-year-old son, stunned by his insight. "You're right," he said, his voice thick with an emotion he couldn't name. "How did you know that?" Leo shrugged. "I read it in a book from the library, and I watch videos online." A prodigy. His son was a prodigy, his brilliance confined to library books and a world of second-hand things. While Leo was direct and analytical, Lily was quiet and observant. She would often sit nearby while he worked, drawing in a sketchbook. She drew pictures of her mom, her brother, and the people at the center. One day she shyly showed him a drawing. It was of him, Dan, fixing the swing set. In the drawing he was smiling. He realized with a jolt that he had been smiling more in the past few days than he had in the past 8 years. The tentative bond was forming, a fragile bridge across an impossible divide. He was connecting with his children not as a millionaire CEO but as a handyman, a helper. He was earning their trust through humble acts of service, and it felt more valuable than any merger he had ever negotiated. The inevitable moment of recognition came on a Saturday. The center was holding a small community gardening day, and Damien was helping Leo and Lily plant a small patch of carrots. Leo told a joke, a silly, childish riddle, and Damien let out a genuine, uninhibited laugh. It was a sound he hadn't heard from himself in years. Leo, who was kneeling in the dirt beside him, suddenly froze. He dropped his small trowel and stared at Damien, his gray eyes wide and intense. "You laugh like him," he said, his voice barely a whisper. Damien's blood ran cold. "Like who, Leo?" he asked, his own voice tight. "The man in the picture," Leo replied, his gaze unwavering. "The one with mommy." Before Damien could react, Lily, who was on his other side, looked up from her carrots. Her own stormy gray eyes, so like his, searched his face, truly seeing him for the first time without the shield of his cap and downcast gaze. She saw the line of his jaw, the shape of his eyes. A flicker of confusion, then dawning realization, crossed her delicate features. "Your eyes?" she whispered, her voice filled with a child's pure, unfiltered wonder. "They're just like ours." At that exact moment, Elena, who had been helping Sarah with some compost bags a few feet away, heard her children's words. She turned, a gentle admonishment on her lips. "Kids, don't bother Dan." Her voice trailed off as she followed their gaze. She looked at Dan. She looked past the worn clothes and the baseball cap, and for the first time, she truly saw the man underneath. Her hand flew to her mouth, her face draining of all color. The gardening trowel she was holding slipped from her grasp and clattered onto the pavement. Recognition, instant and devastating, shattered the quiet afternoon. In her eyes, he saw 8 years of pain, betrayal, and heartbreak coalesce into a single, agonizing moment. The alias was gone. The wall was down. He was Damien Sterling, and he had been discovered. Victoria Sterling was not a woman who tolerated loose ends. Damien's sudden withdrawal, his clipped phone calls, and his absence from the pre-Thanksgiving toast were more than just social infractions. They were anomalies in a life she had meticulously curated for him. They were threats. Her suspicion, a cold and familiar companion, coiled in her gut. She did what she always did when faced with a variable she couldn't control. She hired someone to watch him. The report from her private investigator was delivered in a sealed manila envelope. It was concise and damning. It detailed Damien's movements, not to boardrooms or exclusive clubs, but to a rundown community center in the West End. It included photographs of him in working-class clothes, his hands dirty, fixing a fence. And it included one grainy, long-lens shot of him speaking to a woman with weary eyes and 2 small children. The investigator had helpfully included a name, Elena Vance. Victoria stared at the name, and a cold, contemptuous fury settled over her. Elena Vance, the scholarship girl. The ghost she thought she had successfully exorcised 8 years ago had returned. The very existence of those children was an affront, a stain on the immaculate tapestry of the Sterling legacy. Her brother's sentimentality was a disease, and it needed to be violently excised before the infection could spread. Her mask of polished civility did not just drop. It disintegrated. She immediately moved to cauterize the wound. Her methods were, as always, surgical and cruel. She didn't confront Damien directly. Instead, she attacked his newfound sanctuary. Within 24 hours, a story appeared in a prominent city tabloid, one her family kept on a secret retainer for just such occasions. The headline was plastered across the front page: Sterling Philanthropy, New Luxury Development to Revitalize West End. The article, quoting an anonymous source from Sterling Industries, detailed a bold and benevolent plan to tear down a block of dilapidated and underused buildings to make way for a state-of-the-art residential tower. The centerpiece of this demolished block was the Northwood Community Center. Victoria had framed its destruction as an act of progress, a cruel and brilliant move designed to turn public opinion against the very place Damien was trying to save. Damien saw the headline on a newsstand as he drove to the center, and the calculated malice of it took his breath away. This was Victoria's handiwork. He knew it instantly. It was a warning shot. He immediately called Marcus. "Dig deeper," he commanded, his voice tight with rage. "I want to know everything Victoria did to Elena 8 years ago. Every phone call, every transaction, every threat. I want the gun, Marcus. And I want the smoke." Marcus's investigation this time was not just about tracing corporate shells. It was a forensic dissection of a conspiracy. He uncovered archives of intercepted emails, copies of letters Damien had written to Elena that had never been delivered. He found proof of wire transfers from Victoria's secret fund to a private investigator who had been hired to follow Elena to intimidate her landlords to make her life a living hell. The most damning discovery was a series of legal threats sent from a law firm on the Sterling payroll. They were written on official-looking letterhead accusing Elena of attempted fraud and extortion against the Sterling family, threatening her with a lawsuit that would have financially and academically ruined her. It was all a lie, a campaign of terror designed to isolate a pregnant, terrified young woman and drive her into silence. The final piece of the puzzle was a tampered university transcript. Victoria had paid someone to alter Elena's records, changing a passing grade to a failing one, making it impossible for her to transfer her credits or apply for postgraduate programs. It wasn't just about pushing her away, it was about crippling her future, ensuring she would never have the means to become a threat. It was the complete, systematic destruction of a life. Armed with a folder thick with evidence of his sister's treachery, Damien knew he could no longer hide behind an alias. The time for quiet observation was over. The battle had begun. He drove to Elena's apartment, the tabloid with Victoria's smug announcement lying on the passenger seat like a declaration of war. He knocked on her door, his heart pounding. When she opened it, her face was a mask of anger, fear, and betrayal. "What do you want, Damien?" she asked, her voice trembling but strong. "The truth," he said, his own voice raw. "Please, Elena." Just 5 minutes, he stepped inside her small, clean, but sparsely furnished apartment. The twins were in the other room, their soft voices a stark contrast to the storm brewing between their parents. He didn't try to make excuses. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He simply laid the file on her small kitchen table. "I didn't know," he began, his voice cracking. "I swear to you, Elena, I never knew the extent of it. I was a coward. I let them convince me to leave you. But this is what my sister did." He watched as she read. He saw her hands shake as she looked at the copies of the letters he had written her, letters filled with confused anguish that she had never received. He saw a flicker of shock in her eyes as she saw the fraudulent legal threats, the evidence of the intimidation. Her anger, which had been directed entirely at him, began to shift to refocus on the true architect of her pain. She realized he hadn't just abandoned her, he had been manipulated, his weakness exploited by a far greater cruelty than his own. Just as the heavy silence stretched between them, there was a knock at the door. It was Sarah from the community center. She held a copy of the tabloid, her face grim. "Elena, have you seen this? They're trying to take the center from us." She saw Damien, and her expression hardened. Elena held up a hand. "It's okay, Sarah. He's showing me why." Sarah, who had been a rock for Elena for years, who had witnessed every struggle, every tear, now stood as a testament to the life Victoria had tried to destroy. She listened as Damien explained the conspiracy, her presence solidifying the alliance. They were no longer just individuals, they were a united front against a common enemy. The war, however, was about to escalate. As if on cue, a sharp, official rap sounded at the door. A courier stood outside, holding a sleek, expensive-looking legal envelope addressed to Elena. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was a formal notice of a custody suit. It was filed by the Sterling family estate, claiming that due to her unstable living situation and financial precarity, she was an unfit mother. It stated the family's intention to seek sole custody of Leo and Lily Sterling. Damien's phone pinged with a text message. It was from Victoria. The message was chillingly simple. "A copy of the suit has been sent to you. The children are Sterling's. They will be raised as such. End this foolishness now, or I will not only take them, I will publicly ruin her in the process. The family legacy comes first. Always." The threat was no longer veiled. It was a direct, vicious attack on the two most important people in his life. It was a declaration that his children were not people to be loved, but assets to be controlled. The last vestiges of Damien's loyalty to his family name, to his past, turned to ash. The fury that had been smoldering inside him erupted into a cleansing, defining fire. He looked at Elena's terrified face, at the legal papers designed to tear their family apart, and he made a vow. This was not a battle Victoria would win. The Sterling family Thanksgiving dinner was the crown jewel of their social calendar, a meticulously orchestrated display of power and tradition held at his father's sprawling mansion. It was an event Damien had always attended out of obligation, his presence a required part of the performance. This year, he arrived not as a dutiful son, but as an avenging angel. He bypassed the butler at the door, striding past the assembled guests in the grand foyer, the Vanderbilts, his fiancée Chloe and her aghast parents, his various aunts and uncles, their pleasantries dying on their lips as they saw the thunderous look on his face. He found Victoria holding court in the grand library, a glass of champagne in her hand, looking every bit the poised, untouchable matriarch in waiting. He didn't say a word. He walked to the antique mahogany desk and slammed two things down on its polished surface. The first was the custody suit. The second was the thick file of evidence Marcus had compiled. The sound echoed in the suddenly silent room. "It's over, Victoria," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. She looked from his face to the papers, her practiced smile faltering for only a fraction of a second. She quickly composed herself, a familiar sneer twisting her lips. "Over? Don't be so dramatic, Damien. I am simply cleaning up your mess. I did it for you. For this family." Her voice was laced with the same chilling self-righteousness he'd heard his entire life. "That woman was a nobody, a fleeting mistake that threatened to derail everything our father built. I saved you from her. I preserved the Sterling name." Her eyes, cold and merciless, held no remorse. "Those children," she continued, her voice dripping with disdain, "are a genetic anomaly, a stain on our bloodline that needs to be managed. I was protecting our legacy." Just then, their father, Arthur Sterling, walked into the library, drawn by the confrontation. He saw the files on the desk, his gaze lingering on the bank statements from Victoria's secret fund. His face, usually a mask of stoic authority, turned ashen. He didn't need to ask. He had known. He had sanctioned it with his silence. Damien looked from his sister's unrepentant face to his father's guilty complicity, and something inside him finally broke free. The chains of duty, of legacy, of familial expectation shattered. "You didn't preserve anything," he said, his voice resonating with a newfound power that came not from wealth but from conviction. "You twisted it. You corrupted it. You talk about legacy." He laughed, a bitter, harsh sound. "My children are my legacy. Leo and Lily. Not this company. Not this house. Not this hollow name." He turned his gaze to Chloe, who had followed him into the room, her face a mixture of confusion and horror. "This engagement, our merger, is over," he stated, the words clear and final. He then looked back at his father. "You knew," he said, the accusation hanging in the air like a death sentence. "You stood by and let her do this to Elena. To my children." Finally, he faced Victoria, the architect of all this pain. "You will not touch them. You will not come near them. As of this moment, I am calling an emergency board meeting. I will use every share I own to have you removed from Sterling Industries. And as for this family," he gestured around the opulent room, "I'm done. You are no longer my family. You disowned me in this very room 8 years ago when you made me choose. Now I'm disowning you." Without another word, he turned and walked out of the library, leaving a tableau of shock and ruin in his wake. He didn't stop, didn't look back. He strode out of the mansion, leaving behind the wreckage of his former life without a single pang of regret. He got into his car and drove, not to his penthouse, but to the one place that now felt like home. He found Elena in her small apartment, a single suitcase open on her bed. She was packing, her movements frantic and terrified. The custody suit lay on her nightstand, a testament to the power she was up against. When she saw him, she flinched, expecting more bad news. He walked over to her and gently took her hands, stilling their frantic movements. "Stop packing," he said softly. He told her everything. The confrontation in the library. His father's silent admission of guilt. His final, irrevocable break with his family and his past. He told her he had called off his engagement. "I failed you 8 years ago, Elena," he said, his voice thick with shame and sincerity. "I was a weak, ambitious boy who made the wrong choice. I will not fail you or our children again. I am not that person anymore. I will protect you. I will fight for us. But I need you to trust me." He showed her the full contents of the evidence file, explaining how his legal team was already preparing to use it not just as a defense, but as an attack. He promised her that Victoria's reign of terror was over. He would expose her, no matter the cost to the Sterling name. For the first time since he had reappeared in her life, Elena looked at him and saw the man she had fallen in love with all those years ago, the passionate, determined man who had been buried under the weight of a toxic dynasty. In his eyes, she no longer saw a corporate titan, but a father ready to burn down the world to protect his children. Tears welled in her eyes, but they were not tears of fear. They were tears of relief. She nodded, a slow, deliberate movement. She would trust him. The battle lines were drawn, and for the first time, they were standing on the same side. Victoria, reeling from the confrontation but refusing to accept defeat, moved with the desperate speed of a cornered predator. She knew Damien was preparing to oust her from the board, but she believed she still held one trump card: public opinion. She decided to orchestrate a grand public spectacle to cement her position as the benevolent face of Sterling Industries before Damien could strike. She moved the company's annual Grand Charity Gala, a massive press event, up to the following week. Her plan was to use the platform to officially announce the Sterling Family Foundation's visionary new project, the West End luxury development. She would spin the destruction of the community center as a heroic act of urban renewal, painting herself as a philanthropic savior of the very neighborhood she was plotting to gentrify. It was a brazen, audacious move designed to make her untouchable. The night of the gala arrived. The ballroom of the city's most exclusive hotel was a glittering sea of wealth and influence. Journalists, politicians, and society figures mingled under crystal chandeliers, sipping champagne. Victoria stood at the podium on the grand stage, bathed in a warm, flattering spotlight. She looked radiant, powerful, the very image of grace and corporate responsibility. Damien was in the audience, sitting at a table near the back with Elena and Sarah. They were there not as guests, but as witnesses to her downfall. Elena was terrified, her hand gripping Damien's under the table. "Are you sure this will work?" she whispered. "Trust me," he whispered back, his eyes fixed on the stage. "It is with immense pride," Victoria began, her voice smooth and confident, "broadcast over the state-of-the-art sound system, that I announce a new chapter for our city and for the Sterling legacy. A legacy of progress, of community, of giving back." Behind her, a massive screen lit up, prepared to display architectural renderings of the gleaming new tower. "We will be breaking ground on a project that will bring new life, new opportunity, and new hope to the West End." But as she said the word hope, the screen behind her flickered. The architectural drawings vanished. In their place, a scanned document appeared, stark and undeniable. It was a copy of one of the intercepted letters Damien had written to Elena 8 years prior, his handwriting clear for all to see. The crowd murmured in confusion. Victoria's smile froze on her face. The image changed, showing a bank statement from her secret fund, detailing a payment to a private investigator. Then came the fraudulent legal threat accusing Elena of extortion. Victoria stared in horror as the evidence of her conspiracy was laid bare for the entire city to see. Her technical crew, she realized too late, had been replaced by Damien's own people. He had hijacked her crowning moment. Then the screen changed again, this time to a video. It was a pre-recorded deposition from the lawyer Victoria had hired to intimidate Elena. The man, under oath, calmly detailed how Victoria Sterling had instructed him to engage in a campaign of blackmail and harassment. The room fell into a stunned, horrified silence. But Damien had saved the most damning piece of evidence for last. The final reveal. As the lawyer's deposition ended, a new document filled the screen. It was a scanned copy of an email retrieved by Marcus from a deep server archive. An email from Victoria to a discreet and notoriously corrupt doctor. In it, she was inquiring about the legal process for having a new mother declared mentally unstable and unfit, specifically mentioning postpartum depression as a potential angle. She had tried to have Elena institutionalized after the twins' birth. The collective gasp from the audience was audible. It was no longer just a story of corporate sabotage, it was a portrait of monstrous, inhuman cruelty. The press, smelling the biggest society scandal in a decade, erupted. Camera flashes strobed across the room like lightning. Victoria stood frozen on the stage, her face a pale mask of disbelief and utter ruin. Her carefully constructed world had been publicly, spectacularly demolished in under 3 minutes. As reporters surged toward the stage, a different group of people moved with quiet authority through the chaos. 2 uniformed police officers, followed by a detective in a plain suit, walked directly onto the stage. Damien's legal team had already filed a formal criminal complaint backed by the mountain of evidence. The detective spoke to Victoria in a low voice, and then she was escorted, silently and unceremoniously, off the stage, her public downfall complete and absolute. In the front row, Arthur Sterling, who had come to support his daughter, slumped in his chair, his face gray. The Sterling legacy he had spent his life building was now a synonym for disgrace. Amid the chaos, Damien walked calmly onto the stage and took the microphone from the podium. The room quieted, all eyes turning to him. "The Sterling legacy my sister spoke of," he said, his voice clear and steady, "is one of lies, cruelty, and corruption. That legacy ends tonight." He paused, his gaze sweeping over the shocked faces. "The real Sterling legacy begins right now." He turned toward the wings of the stage. A moment later, Elena emerged, her head held high. She was holding Leo and Lily's hands. Sarah walked protectively beside them. They joined Damien at the center of the stage, a united front against the glittering wreckage of the old guard. The cameras flashed, but this time they weren't capturing a scandal. They were capturing the birth of a new family, finally whole, finally free, and standing together in the light. 6 months later, the world was a different place. The manicured lawns of the Sterling mansion and the cold glass of Damien's penthouse had been replaced by a comfortable, warm house with a sprawling, slightly wild backyard. The spring sun shone down on Damien, who was on his knees in the rich soil of a newly planted garden. He was no longer in a bespoke suit, he wore faded jeans and a simple cotton shirt, a streak of dirt smudged on his cheek. He was helping Leo and Lily plant a row of tomato seedlings. The transformation in him was more than just sartorial. The permanent tension in his shoulders was gone, replaced by a relaxed, easy posture. The cold, detached mask he had worn for years had vanished, and the lines around his eyes were from smiling, not from stress. He would look up from the dirt and see Elena on the porch, sketching in a notepad. A genuine, peaceful smile on her face and a feeling of profound contentment would wash over him. The hollow CEO was a distant memory. In his place was a man who was learning the simple, joyful rhythms of being a father and a partner. He had made good on his promise. He had sold his majority stake in Sterling Industries, a move that sent shockwaves through the financial world. He kept enough to live comfortably, but the vast majority of the fortune went into establishing a new entity, the Vance Foundation. With Elena at its helm, the Foundation's first official act was to purchase the entire block that Victoria had slated for demolition. The Northwood Community Center was not only saved, it was completely renovated and expanded. It was renamed the Sarah Johnstone Center for Families in honor of its tireless director. It now offered everything from free legal aid and job training programs to scholarships and childcare, a true sanctuary for families who, like Elena once had, found themselves with nowhere else to turn. It was Damien's final, definitive act of redemption, using the wealth that had caused so much pain to create a legacy of healing. As the twins carefully watered their new plants, chattering about how big the tomatoes would get, Damien walked over to Elena on the porch. He took her hand, his calloused from garden work, hers smudged with charcoal from her sketch pad. He looked into her eyes, the same eyes that had haunted his dreams for 8 long years, and saw only love and a shared future. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. It wasn't velvet, and the ring inside was not a massive, ostentatious diamond meant for the society pages. It was a simple, elegant band with a small, perfect sapphire, the color of the sky on the day they first met. "Elena," he said, his voice quiet and full of an emotion he no longer tried to hide. "You and the twins are my real life. My only life. I wasted so much time chasing a legacy that meant nothing. My only legacy is the family we build together. Starting now," he got down on one knee. "Will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life trying to make up for the time we lost?" Tears of pure joy streamed down her face as she nodded, her voice a happy whisper. "Yes. Of course, yes." Just as he slipped the ring onto her finger, Leo came running up to the porch, his face beaming with pride. He held out his dirt-covered hands, and nestled in his palm was a tiny, perfectly ripe strawberry from a nearby patch, the first fruit of their new garden. "Look," he said, his voice full of a child's simple, profound wonder. "Look what we made." Damien looked from the small, perfect fruit in his son's hand to the beautiful woman whose hand he now held, to his daughter who was running to join them. He pulled Elena close, his heart full to bursting. He looked at her and smiled, a real smile that reached the depths of his soul. "He's right," he said softly, his voice thick with overwhelming gratitude. "This is what we made. Something real.